Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our NACAC Rural SIG panel discussion today. We are so excited to have you join our learning lab. Because it is a little after 1, we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. This panel is going to be recorded, so just a heads up on that one. And we have a Q&A portion of this event, so I'm going to go ahead and just remind you all questions will be able to be submitted through that. So our learning lab today is financial aid, rural and small town scenarios. So first, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers. I am Megan Kripple. I am our moderator for the panel today. I'm the Director of Enrollment Management and Student Services for Kent State Geauga and the Twinsburg Academic Center. So you might know Kent State University is a large public institution in the state of Ohio, but I work at our regional campuses and 2 small communities in Northeast Ohio. And then next, I have Alma Martinez. She is a lead financial aid counselor at California State University, Monterey Bay. Alma, are you there? There we are.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Alma Martinez, and I'm a financial aid counselor at CSU Monterey Bay, and I've been in financial aid for probably about 19 years or so. So I hope I can provide you with the information that you need.
Thanks, Alma. Next up, we have Donna Holcomb. Donna Holcomb is the financial aid coordinator at Kent State University Geauga and the Twinsburg Academic Center. She's with me. So hi, Donna.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar, and really excited to get in there and to share with you some of the FAFSA changes so that you can help your students succeed. So looking forward to talking with you.
And last but certainly not least, we have Brian Dixon, and he is joining us from the University of Texas at Austin.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. Brian Dixon, again, Vice Provost of Enrollment Management, UT Austin. I've worked in the financial aid field for certainly more than 20 years, and want to share, public flagship, sort of experience on how we might address some of these different issues as well. Wonderful to talk to all of you today.
Thank you so much, Brian, Donna, and Alma. And we have a couple of, I'll say, background helpers today. Megan Taylor and Jason Mogan, they are a part of our NACAC Rural SIG leadership team along with myself. So they'll be kind of in the background helping along with things in case there's questions or concerns. Right. So now I want to go ahead and review our agenda. So welcome and introductions. We're going to start off with a review of the 2023 and 24 FAFSA changes and give a hint as to some of the really big changes that are occurring in 2024-25. We're also going to review common financial aid scenarios that are going to impact our rural and small town students. So what we'll do for that is I'll have a scenario, and then each of our speakers will provide how they would answer those questions. Our university representatives today come from all parts of the country. And so the perspectives that we might have for a student on the West Coast might be a little bit different for a student that you are working with in the Midwest. Then we're going to do a summary of just some financial aid best practices. And as with all webinars, but especially financial aid ones, it's we always have a lot of questions. So we are going to end with a Q&A session with our panelists today. So we're going to review a couple of things with navigating Zoom. So chat to engage with panelists and other attendees. We have a Q&A feature to submit questions to the panelists during the Q&A portion of the event. That's kind of what I addressed earlier. And then as a webinar attendee, just heads up, you're on video and you're always on mute. So we don't have to worry about our cameras accidentally popping on. And as I noted previously as well, this session is being recorded. So first we're going to have Donna Holcomb, and she is going to present regarding the FAFSA changes for 23-24 as part of the FAFSA Simplification Act.
Thank you, Megan. So the 23-24 FAFSA became available on October 1st. And as part of the FAFSA Simplification Act, which is in effect now and will continue next year, some of the questions were removed, such as the male or female question. We won't see that any longer on the FAFSA. The selective service question has been removed as well. And if you remember, that was for male students age 18 through 25 who had to sign up for selective service. So that question is now taken out of the FAFSA. The drug eligibility question, so if you had a drug conviction, they determined on the FAFSA if you were eligible for aid, that has been completely removed. Now, for our incarcerated students, they will still do the FAFSA, but they will be directed to a separate form within that FAFSA. So not all of the questions will load for them. So they will have basically a separate application for the incarcerated students. Now, another thing that has changed and retired was the My Student Aid mobile app. So not too many people were using that. They retired that. Now, students can still file with their phones, but they have to go to studentaid.gov. It's just the My Student Aid mobile app that went away, but they can still file using their cell phones and access that through studentaid.gov. So those were the changes for the 23-24 year. Now, the 24-25 year, that's when we're going to see a lot of the changes that have been in the news, and you may have heard different, snippets of it. But in 24-25, the EFC, or the expected family contribution, that is being replaced what's called an SAI, a student aid index. So for those of us who had to or ever had to explain what the EFC is, this is great for us. So I dealt with a family who had an EFC of 21,000, and they were just so upset that they had to pay 21,000 to attend our regional campus when our cost is like 7,000. So that will be replaced. That wording of expected family contribution will now be a student aid index. So that is how we're going to work on that. Another thing that's going to change on the 24-25 FAFSA is the number of questions. So we're going to take it down from 108 that there's currently having down to 36. So that's, just awesome. So the easier it is, we remove some of the barriers for students to get in there, to do this FAFSA and to get out. So those are some of the changes we can expect. Now, this FAFSA for 24-25 will come out in October of 2023. So that's why that's still on the horizon with us. So those are the changes that are going to be taking place.
Thank you very much. And I did put a link to the FAFSA Simplification Act detail. I believe it's over 30 some pages long. It's super exciting reading if you want to go through that. I will also make a note too, that with the SAIs, we will now have an option for negative SAIs. So before EFCs, all you could do is end with the 0 was the lowest number that you're going to have. And so I think that's really going to help with some of those conversations that we are having with our students that Donna was referencing regarding not understanding what that EFC meant. Alma and Brian, do you have anything you'd like to add regarding the changes to the FAFSA for the next coming 2 years?
Yeah, I would say one of the things that we've been looking at is our hope is, like, with the FAFSA being simplified, that the institutions aren't going to ask for additional information and data. But for example, in the state of Texas, we still do have a selective service requirement to receive state aid. So we will be following up with students accordingly. So it will be helpful to pay attention to a particular institution to see if there are some questions that that they may still need to collect from you through the simplification process.
Thank you, Brian. Alma, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I agree with Brian. I mean, honestly, here at our campus in California, we are not required to ask for selective service for state aid. So we are, we are more than happy, and we are looking forward to the 24-25. We are hoping that the simplified version is actually going to help students to make this process much easier, and we have to collect less documentation. So hopefully it's a more smooth process. We can only hope.
If you do have the opportunity, I encourage everyone, to take a look at that FAFSA Simplification Act documentation. In all honesty, while it's long, it's very simple to read and it's broken down very well so you can understand all of the changes that are going to be occurring with the FAFSA. And I can assure you that between our partner organizations like NAFSA and your state organizations, there are going to be plenty of opportunities for understanding all the changes that are occurring in the upcoming couple of years, especially with 24-25, since technically 23-24 FAFSA has already launched since we are into October, and our organization will keep everybody in tune to all of these changes that are going to be occurring. In order for us to really support our students, though, we need to have an understanding of the different types of situations our students are in and how we can support them. So now we're going to talk about some of the situations that we as rural financial aid teams have encountered over the years and what you can do in those scenarios. So the first scenario I have is, sure, some of us have gone through this before, where you've encountered a student who just can't get access to the technology in order to complete the FAFSA since it's online. I know with our campus in Burton, Ohio, there's actually not reliable internet. So for each of my panelists, and I'll just take turns with your names, how do you support students who do not have the technology available to complete the FAFSA? And I'll start with Brian.
Yeah, so there's certainly been several things that we've tried to do creative to help students and families. Sometimes the technology they don't have is access to internet, although there's a lot of work that's been done recently to make sure that more folks have access to internet. So we generally rely on our local high school recruiters to understand that particular area, to try to say, oh, if the high school isn't an option that's available, what are some of the either nonprofits, community groups, churches we've partnered with in the past to be able to get access for students and families to complete the FAFSA. Also, the other issue sometimes for us is, you know, a student has a question about the FAFSA, but they don't have the technology that we're using to be able to get a question answered. And so we may just have to kind of go old school and ask them to either send us an email or leave us a voicemail so that we can, you know, follow up their question and answer, sort of not in real time, but, you know, overnight, and review the next morning and get it over to them. So those are two of the things that we have used. Certainly, our team's been more than willing to, you know, loan out computers and different things like that where those things are necessary and appropriate, and just encourage, you know, students and surrogates who are supporting students to let us know the things that you're missing and that you're needing, so we can help get you what you need. So.
Thank you, Brian. Alma, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, here what we do is when we partner a lot with high schools in our area, in community colleges, and we do this massive, what we call Cash for College events, where all these students that, you know, don't have the technology, the high school or the college, or even here at CSUMB, we open up like the library or a computer lab, and we invite other high school, other counselors from other community colleges around the area to come and help us with that. Sometimes we, you know, we print out the paper FAFSA version, we mail it to the student and the parent. We have gone as far as, you know, being on the phone on a three-way call with the parent, the student, and us walking them, you know, question by question on the paper FAFSA. They, you know, complete it, they sign it, and they mail it directly to FAFSA. Obviously, that can take a little bit longer than the usual FAFSA on the web. But for those students that cannot make it to any of those Cash for College events, then that's the last resort. Hey, let's get on the phone. You know, sometimes we do offer like late hours from 5 to 8 to help students with that. So that's another, you know, kind of outreach that we do for them. We're like, okay, not to worry, you can make it. Let's get on the phone. Let me get you that paper FAFSA and we'll make it happen. But yeah.
Thank you. And Donna.
Yeah, so for our students that don't have reliable technology or, or internet at all, I actually have in-person FAFSA appointments that they can come in here and we can use the, computers here, and I would walk them through the steps. So that's what I find very helpful. I would do FAFSA nights, and those weren't very well attended, I think, because the students were afraid, they wanted one-on-one help. So the one-on-one appointments have worked so good. And another thing is, in this Burton area, we have an organization that goes out into our area high schools, and they are trained with the FAFSA, and they go out and will bring computers with them, laptops with them, and they can help a student at least start the FAFSA, get their FSA ID, and then start inputting information, put a save key in, and then the parents can join later to finish it. So that's how we reach out. Basically, they can come in here to the campus, use some of the resources in the community that are in their high schools as well.
Donna, can I ask you a follow-up on that? So when you set up an appointment, some of our participants might be wondering, like, how long might it take for someone to fill out the FAFSA? I know we're trying to simplify it and make it shorter, but how long does that appointment normally last?
Sure. Well, I can get in there actually in and out in about, 25 or 27 minutes, but I always allow an hour because, there's going to be some things that they have questions on. So basically we'll go through, they have their FSA ID created, the student and their parent. They'll come in, we'll go ahead, we can use the data retrieval tool to link in that information. And then once we get out, so maybe, 40 minutes with their questions or them doing the typing, the student, and then I go the last 15 minutes of the appointment and look what their EFC is, expected family contribution, to see how much Pell Grant they're going to get. So, we have that discussion about 15, 20 minutes of that appointment. So I always allow an hour, but I do understand if they're busy and they have to leave in half an hour, we can still get it done. So.
Awesome.
Thank you. So I have a follow-up question to this one, and the panelists didn't know I was going to ask this. But we talked about the complexity of the FAFSA in its current state. What are some of when we think about the technology, there's also the line of answering some of the more complicated questions. What's one or two questions from each of the panelists that you find trip up the students the most on the FAFSA? Where that 26-minute FAFSA appointment turns into a 50-minute because we just don't know how to answer it? Anything that comes to mind for everyone?
I mean, one of the first and most obvious is, I'm going to ask information about your parents' income, right? And so most people don't know that, don't have that, and there's a lot of kind of running around to try to pull that information together. Now there is a process that you can set up where your parents' income can be automatically transferred over into the FAFSA, but that's certainly one of the areas. And then there's a number of questions about determining whether or not a student is a dependent or an independent student. It seems like a number of students, kind of get tripped up on those kinds of questions about, providing support and those kind of things. Then household size, just who's in the household, who gets included, how's that work?
I get that. And I also get who's the parent. So if their parents are divorced, the student's like, well, I can't get my dad's information because he's not part of the picture, but you don't need that information if the parents are divorced. They think they need biological mother and biological father. So if the mom is remarried, it's mom and stepfather. So I get some of those questions too as well. So, the parent, and as Brian was saying, who's in the household. So some of our students, they have relatives that stay with them for a little bit, or siblings, that leave the household. So, but that's what that trips them up. And also the asset questions. So, what are your assets? So they're not quite sure, when it says cash on hand, they're reaching into their pocket and, seeing how much money they have. So things like that, a little bit of time, or those who forgot their FSA ID, may have been created, or they forgot the save key to get back in. So those are some of the things I see as well.
Alma, how about you?
Very similar as well. FSA ID, I think out of everything, it's kind of what can prolong that appointment. to, sometimes the whole hour, if not a little bit more, especially if they forgot their challenge questions and whatnot. So typically when I'm, on Cash for College events or when I'm with the student, I'm like, take a picture of it. Write it down. No, I want to see you write it down, because this is like your PIN number. Like if you have a debit card, this is what you will use and you cannot share it. And they just look at me when I say, no, I need to see you do it, because, later on they will have the struggle. Same with the household. A lot of students get confused with which people they claim under taxes versus their household size. So I always try to explain to them, like, look, those two may not match all the time, and that's perfectly fine, because FAFSA is using taxes from 2 years prior. So obviously your household size or your dependents that your parents have now probably are not going to be the same. It just depends on every household and whatnot. But especially now with COVID, I don't know if all of you experienced, but we had a lot of older kids coming back home. And so, the parents were now supporting these older kids again, because these kids had, even though they're, they're adult children per se, they lost their jobs. They came back home. So we're like, yes, you are allowed to list them, because they will be at home until June 30th of next year. So yes, even though they were not claimed. So typically that's what it gets our students the most, like, but my mom didn't claim my brother in their taxes. So I usually like to ask the following question, like, okay, so can your brother support himself? Like, let's take your parents out of the picture. Can your brother pay for his own mortgage, his food, everything? Oh no, he works at, X, Y, and Z and just 10 hours a week. Okay, no, so then he's part of the household. So, those are kind of like the follow-up questions that I like to do to kind of get them to understand better per se.
Thank you all for that. And I appreciate the willingness to jump in on that extra question. So we talk a lot about how the FAFSA can be really challenging to complete, but there's also a lot of issues for our students when we find to even get them to be willing to fill out the FAFSA. So the next question is really related to the cost of education. So how do you advise students and families who question the value of a college education? And I'm going to go in reverse this time. So I think I will start with, I think it's Alma who gets to go first this time.
So, I always tell the parent or the student, I go, look, it's hard to see the value, because, for example, if you go out and purchase a car, you get to take that car with you right away, right? You get to see what you're investing per se or purchasing. But education, it's going to open other doors for you, and nobody can take it away from you. Like that degree, that education, that knowledge that you're going to get, that experience, no one can take that away from you, versus, let's say you buy a car, something goes wrong, they revoke the car, there it goes, right? I go, so education, definitely it's going to open a whole new world for your student. It's, it's a value that no one can take away from you. And it really is, students can have so much more opportunities once, and obviously once what they want to pursue, their career and whatnot, you kind of, go into that, like, well, imagine if you don't have this degree, or if you're not able to get, this internship and whatnot, so that you can actually get to see if you really want to be a marine biologist, if you really want to be this or that. So, but I always tell them, education, nobody can take that away from you. It's something that you will keep with you forever. Your child will have that forever, but that's typically how I approach it.
Thank you. Donna.
I agree. That was very good. I like the analogy with the car. I say similar, that a college education is something that you earn, that it can't be taken away from you. So your degree is something that you have, you can fall back on. So let's say the students that work in a family farm, by coming to college, it'll just enhance that. say if they take marketing classes or business or accounting, it can only help that family farm, you know, to progress and how they market it and how they sell the supplies from the farm. So it's just helpful. So I do say that, like Alma, that it's something that cannot be taken away from you, can only enhance your situation. And also it's something to fall back on. Let's say the, you know, farm closes or things change, you know, it's something that you have this college education to fall back on.
Thank you. Ryan, right on schedule.
Yeah, you know, when I think about education, the value of education, and making those investments, I think it's really about betting on yourself. You know, that you are going to think about a lifestyle that you want to have, right? And that doesn't mean lifestyles of the rich and famous, but you know, I saw a lot of people go through the pandemic and say, you know, what's important to me is to have a better life balance, right, between my family and my home. I want to be able to spend some time being able to maybe work remotely, or I want to be my own boss. I want to own my own company. I want to do some of those kinds of things. And so I think what's been challenging about the value of college education is we've kind of tried to, as a society, try to use a one size fits all approach to that. And that doesn't really work. It's really more about deciding the things that are important to you and saying, what are the best pathways to get there? And if we don't have sort of a distinct set of labor market skill sets, it gets to be hard to have a leverage in the labor market to be able to say, I would like to work under these circumstances, or I would like to get paid at this particular rate. So yeah, I think the value of a college education is investing in yourself, and we're seeing lots of great trends about people living longer and longer and healthier lives. And since I'm going to live a long and healthy life, being able to have those choices is absolutely critical and important. So that's why I think a college education is an important part of that pathway.
Thank you all. I'll also make a note too that, you know, we all work for universities on this panel, but students often think that, well, they assume college is going to be long-term debt, but we also have to keep in mind that completing the FAFSA is going to allow us to see what their options are for gift aid so that they don't have to pay back. We also have to keep in mind that often students do to pay for career schools and trade schools. You use financial aid for that as well. And so it's just important to keep in mind, it's the cost of education, but it's also, as a lot of our other panelists have referenced, it's investing with yourself. And there are different pathways to get a college or post-secondary education as a whole. And when I used to work with students as an admissions counselor, one of the things that I would also talk about is actually similar to Alma's car analogy is the cost of your degree doesn't depreciate over time. It actually appreciates over time. I live and work in a rural community where it's not unheard of to see students with $30,000 trucks. And where I work at a campus where the tuition, when I first started, where you could buy you could pay for your degree with no aid for less than $30,000 for a 4-year degree. And it's still around that amount too. So that's something to keep in mind when we talk about the value of a degree long-term. It's also to looking at, it's more a value of post-secondary education and what that's going to do for you in the long run. But I do think that we should keep in mind that can be debt with going to a career school or a trade school over time too. All great options for students, but sometimes I do experience students that are surprised that it costs to go to a career school. We have a lot of those in our area and they're great, but again, the value of that usually outweighs the cost as a whole, that upfront cost. That upfront cost can be scary.
And I was just gonna add it, and it's a long-term return because it also has impact on your children. So in our case, I was a first-generation college student, so was my wife. All of our children, you know, have college degrees now. Our youngest is 21, she has a college degree, and we're super proud of all of them. And they all got tuition scholarships to be able to go because as we invest and we create not just more opportunities for ourselves, but also for our children and our future generations.
And Anne, I see your question in there and one in like a scenario or two, I think we're going to answer it. So I just so you know, I do see that question. So thank you, Anne. And so the next scenario is going to be, how do you support students whose families don't have needed documentation for the FAFSA? So for example, not having tax or dependency information available, as a lot of the times we are going to be working within rural communities, self-employed family, or those who kind of, we live in a gig economy now, which is completely different. So documentation is really going to vary. And Brian, do you want to take the first answer at this one?
Sure. There are lots of different angles that we can look at this particular question with. This is not an uncommon scenario. It's really important to start by communicating with the institution that you're interested in going with, because each institution may have sort of a slightly different way of resolving this. If, for example, it's an unusual family situation and there's not dependency information, then we might ask for different sort of third-party documentation, and that standard might be getting something from a high school guidance counselor or a clergy member documenting the particular situation that's going on. Sometimes with taxes, it's not uncommon for us in rural communities to be dealing with blended families, right? So families that have US citizens and maybe another parent is undocumented altogether. And so it's hard to produce tax information that's necessary and needed. And so we may either ask for information either on a letterhead format or some other way that we might be able to collect that necessary information. And this can be incredibly sensitive. So we always encourage sort of setting an appointment, working one-on-one with someone, then as opposed to just sort of sending an email, because there can be questions about conflicting information. Maybe a parent's working under someone else's social security number or some sort of situation along those lines. And so we can best guide. We prefer that you would ask us in advance and say, hey, we have this particular situation. Is there something that you can do to assist us and to help us? But in most cases, we can figure out a way if we know what is going on, and just encouraging not to get frustrated with the, why isn't it as simple for me as everybody else, which I get that can be frustrating. So apologies for that in advance.
Thanks, Brian. Alma.
Yes, so when we get those, out of the norm scenarios, typically either the admissions counselor or the high school counselor will reach out to us in advance and say, hey, heads up, we have this special scenario with this student. Like, for example, just 2 weeks ago, we had this student that the dad has, their own business. They don't file taxes, they need to do the FAFSA. So, what I did, I set up a one-on-one meeting with the parents and the student. And, for federal taxes, what I did, I just downloaded what is called the Schedule C to see if they were required to file taxes. The parents, they have a little, they go to the farmer's market, and that's how they survive, right? They sell fruit and whatnot. So after their expenses and whatnot, the per se income, came out to less than $400. So I'm like, well, you're not required to file. I go, so we can go ahead and put that. We can put your income, with those $400, because it's just you and your wife who, work in the farmer's market. You don't need to report the value of what you have as an investment, because it's obviously less than 100 employees. So I think when it comes to those scenarios, you have to somehow talk to the student in a way that you earn their trust, and the one of the parent, right? Especially if it's one of those situations where they're afraid, well, what if, are you guys gonna report me to the IRS? Or, my parent is undocumented. Are you guys gonna contact, the Department of Homeland Security and whatnot? So we are always reassuring the student, look, we're here to assist you. We really need for you to be, upfront with us. Let me know what the situation is. And then, like Brian said, most of the time we are able to find a solution. It's just having that open communication. I think that's the key, like being able to get and earn their trust, right? And obviously the parent as well, make them feel that we are on their side, that we're not policing them or questioning, well, why you didn't do this, or why this is going on in the household and stuff like that.
Thank you. Donna, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes, so on that, in a perfect world, we would just go into the FAFSA and use the data retrieval tool and go ahead and download that information. So that's a perfect world, but that doesn't always happen. So a lot of the times we have to take the paper tax forms and then go ahead and enter the information with the student. And then there are special situations that we handle that Brian and Alma touched on about students that don't fit the scenario. They don't have a parent, or they are homeless, or they're in a guardianship or something like that. So those are different issues. So depending on how they answer the FAFSA questions, if they click on that, the parents' information will not, they won't be asked parents' information. But what happens is when we get the FAFSA in at the school, our school asks for some kind of documentation. So this is where, do we need a dependency appeal? Are we going to take this student from, because of their age, under 24, are we going to take them and then make them from dependent to independent by doing this form? So that's where we work. Those are very situations that are delicate situations that we have to handle. So, you don't fit the scenario, the cookie cutter, that you can just use the data retrieval tool. And here's why. So I do get calls like that from the high schools, the guidance counselors that are working, or that special group we have in our area high schools. So it's just being aware of the situation and helping the student, reaching out whatever way we can. We don't want to put barriers that they can't do the FAFSA because they don't have, parents, or they don't have this information available. So we most definitely work with them on a one-on-one basis.
Thank you.
And Megan, if I could just add too, and sometimes we notice that getting access to tax information is sometimes a language barrier. We don't find it uncommon that we might have a student whose primary language is English, but maybe their parents primarily speak Spanish or some other language. So I would encourage, like, if that's the issue, to either reach out to the school to find someone, or find someone in the community, so that the student's not put in that situation to try to sort of answer questions outside of their proverbial pay grade, right? Like they don't know all of those particulars. And so you should be able to find a school who's willing to support you and make sure your parents can answer those questions directly and explain it in a way that they can understand it.
Thank you. All right. So I am going to, before we move on to scenario 4, because Anne's question is kind of aligned with it. So the question is around professional judgment for farm families. PJ, that's everybody's favorite, I think. What do you do when the value of the land is higher than the income from it? I think the context of the question is related to, determining their need. And Anne, feel free to correct me if I'm not presenting that question correctly. But as our next question is self-employed families, I thought we could kind of address that. So professional judgment for farm families, what do you do when the value of the land is higher than the income from it? How would you advise those students and their families? I know, this is a good one. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, what the first thing that would sort of come to mind for me, I would be wanting to ask questions about whether or not you live on that farm, right? Like, so if you live on that farm, right, then it's your primary living place, just as if you lived your primary home. If you're not a family farm owner, you don't declare that as a part of your assets. So let's just sort of take that aside. So let's say you don't live on the farm, right, and you're somehow have land somewhere else that you don't live on, but you're farming it. So if that's the case, then the question would be, because the way this question is phrased, that you must own it, then I would say that you take the value of the land minus what you owe on the land. And that's what I would think about, as a starting point to determine what the asset is worth. And then it's sort of a separate question about sort of how income would get involved in that situation. But if income was low enough, the asset would not have as much of a as much of a meeting. So that's where I would sort of start with the conversation is, do you live on the land, which most family farms, they do tend to live on that particular land and property, and that would pretty much take that portion of the asset question out. But then if you did, again, own some land somewhere else, or if you owned land, this isn't uncommon, I've seen this as well, where multiple families own a piece of land and you have a portion thereof, and then we would just kind of work with you to try to help you figure out the calculation of the portion of that asset which is yours. And we always get kind of great questions about, well, how would I divide that up and get access to that? But that's sort of separate. But those are some of my initial thoughts. I don't know if Alma or Donna, you have additional.
I agree with Brian. There's a question on the FAFSA. It says the net worth of the current business and or investment farm. So they don't want you to include a family farm somewhere that you live, or a family business that has 100 or fewer full-time or full-time equivalent employees. So I would, agree with Brian and then break it down as he did there. So seeing if that is the farm they live on, then we don't have to include it. So.
Thank you, Donna.
Likewise, I would ask the same questions, just like Donna and Brian said. We have to break it down for the family and start asking those questions like, well, do you live there? Or if it's, it's just asking those questions and break it down. And that typically will, most of the times in our case, it happens to be, no, you don't have to include it, And then if you do have to include it, we have had scenarios where we ask, okay, so now that, what's the actual net value, right? If you have, I don't know, a loan against that property, any debt, you have to deduct that from the value. So it's just breaking it down into little pieces to get to that number that you want, to make sure that, we're not reporting a wrong number that will impact the student in, the wrong way.
Yeah. So we have a follow-up question to that. So should the students plan to reach out to each of their colleges' financial aid offices? It's not necessarily a straightforward fill out the FAFSA thing, because if you do that, it's still kind of complex. So I understand where Anna's coming from. So what would your recommendations be? And I also thought that if they don't have a particular college in mind, do you have community resources? Because my reaction to this, Anne, is they could actually come talk to us. And even if they don't plan on coming to us, we would still guide them. So kind of everybody on the panel, what's your thoughts on this one? Do you agree that it's probably not a straight fill out the FAFSA thing and let it go when they're this complicated?
Yes, I do agree on that. So it would be reach out. So on the FAFSA, you can list up to 10 schools, but reach out to maybe a few that you're interested in going to. Even though you don't come here, we can still help you and answer your questions because we receive the same training. So, it will be straight across the board. So the answers that you get about the rules on it. So definitely direct them into a financial aid office.
Alma,
Yeah,
Brian.
I would just add to that too. I think it's not uncommon that there's an important part of our FAFSA process, and you ask a question and you're not quite sure that answer sounds right, or it seems like it's going to sort of cut off your college experience. I would encourage that you ask someone else that question, that you get that sort of follow-up piece of information, and you ask them for where that's being referenced at, like where is that guidance, where is that instruction, where does that look at? Like we can all be guilty, if not intentional, but we can all be guilty of going a little too fast sometimes in a process, or sort of mishearing a question or a piece of information. So it can be scary, but I just encourage you all to be sort of strong advocates for yourself and just ask clarifying questions.
Well, then our last official scenario is related to helping students with self-employed families navigate the FAFSA. So how do you help students with self-employed families navigate the FAFSA? And Donna, I'll start with you this time.
Okay, so these are what I call my creative accounting people. So they're definitely creative in their situation and scenarios. And they're the ones that are giving you, it's like pulling teeth to get information from these folks. So, and then when they do give you the information, they give you just pieces, just a small piece, but then that triggers other paperwork that we need. So it's really, first of all, it takes some patience to deal with it and just to explain why you need it, because because they're like, well, they don't want to give up anything. They hold it close to them. They don't want to give this information forward. But just explaining that we're using this information to get a package. And with this package, we'll be able to, for your son or daughter to come to school. So it's for the financial aid package. So we're not, spying on you. We're not going to tell, like Alma said, the, IRS or anything like that. But so these are the ones that I feel they require a lot of extra time because they're just not willing to give us the information that we're asking for.
Thank you. Alma, do you have anything to add to that?
I definitely agree with Donna. These can be a little bit challenging. And what I try to do, especially when I notice that the parent is a little hesitant, like, well, why do you need to know that? Well, why this or why that? I kind of try to explain to the parent and to earn their trust, right? I'm just trying to see what it's, how I can do to help your student have access to more federal aid or state aid. So, yes, because I have come into some really, I'm like, oh, this accountant really did a good job. But yeah, and I think the key to everything, especially when it's all these challenging scenarios, is to actually talk to the student and the parent and let them know that you're on their side. You're not going to police them. You're not there to judge. I mean, you are there to assist. And yes, sometimes when they have they're self-employed, that's, they are not willing to report everything, or, they don't want to even, let us see their tax information, nothing. So sometimes it's for us, there's been scenarios where it takes more than one appointment, to kind of get the parent on the same boat, like, okay, so now we're going to do this and take it step by step. Not overwhelm them with questions.
Thank you. Brian.
So it'd be two pieces of advice I would give to self-employed families sort of navigating the FAFSA. One, I would say, start asking your questions early, right? Like this would be a good population, sophomore, junior year to start asking those questions, start talking to some of those schools and get into some of the particulars around that. Number two, like in addition to what's already been shared, I think one of the areas that supporting self-employed families is that we oftentimes get into questions and conversations about predicting future earnings, right? So self-employed, yes, I had this great year and this great year and this great year, but there's all these reasons here why I believe that my future years are not going to be that way. And that leads into sort of conversation about professional judgments, and different institutions have different levels and comfort around sort of how to effectively sort of project what future earnings are going to look like. They may want you to see sort of a 6-month, 8-month, 9-month trend before they're willing to sort of go in and make some of those income adjustments that seem to be the case. But I would say is transparent as you can be in the process, the more timely and the more smooth the process will go for you and for your family. As uncomfortable as that may be, the more transparent you can be, the smoother the process will go.
Yeah. I have a question too. So oftentimes, at least I've experienced both personally and professionally, where you have self-employed families who their assets are definitely incongruent with what the income looks like, because you're self-supporting, and so you do have to. You talked about, Brian, you need to be prepared for next year making absolutely no money. I mean, that happens, and I have a self-employed spouse. So how do you counsel those students when there is too that, again, the assets and income just I've seen them super far apart? Or have you experienced the incongruence in assets and income cause issues for any students?
Yeah, for sure. And there's lots of reasons why that might be the case. Sometimes people make a mistake, literal mistake, right? Like just fat fingered something in there. And so that's one of the edits that we look for when we're doing some of our financial aid reviews. I know that's not always thought about, but like as institutions, we are looking for when students make mistakes, right? Like we're not just trying to figure out like how to give students and families as little money as possible, but we want to make sure that if there's a mistake that gets alerted and we get that cleared up. But then we also want to kind of understand if the assets and the income, which tends to be outside of the general norm, if the assets tend to be high and the income tends to be low, is there a reason for that? Was there some sort of one-time payout? Was there a retirement? Was there a home that was sold and there's a plan to buy a new home? Was there a death in the family and this was a life insurance and there's an income that's not here and there's a particular purpose for those particular funds? So we do want to understand that there are some formulas out there where the asset may not make a difference. And depending on the institution that the student is looking to go to, the plan on how that asset's going to be spent may be able to be removed or reduced through professional judgment. That's sort of an institution by institution decision through that professional judgment process. But I'll defer to my colleagues if they have additional to add on that one.
Yes, we have the special circumstance form is what we call it. So keep in mind that we're using a tax information from, prior years. So things may have changed. Maybe the situation you were doing really good a few years ago, but you don't have that income now. So we're not going to penalize the family. We're going to take into consideration by doing this special circumstance form. Maybe it was a will, estate, lottery, some kind of winning that you don't have now. So we will take that into consideration and look at that, that good year compared to what we're currently making or what we're currently bringing in. So, and I know other institutions have that. Ours is called special circumstance, but it does fall under a professional judgment.
Thank you, Donna and Brian. Alma, do you have anything to add?
No.
Great. So that wraps up our scenarios, but then I wanted to review with our group here some best practices for the FAFSA and then common mistakes to avoid. So I'll go ahead and kind of read some of these off, and then panelists, you're welcome to jump in. The big thing that we like to say, especially within NAFSA, so it's our National Financial Aid Organization, is apply early. And I say this really because if there's going to be issues you have with the FAFSA, then it's going to help you address them in a timely manner. I work with an open enrollment institution, and so our students could be completing stuff until August, and it just makes it harder for aid to be in place. So even if that student's not sure where they want to apply or where they're going to enroll, completing the FAFSA early just gives us more time to address the problems. I always tell students, I want you to enjoy your summer, like have a good time. You know what? You're already busy in the fall. Try to get it done then whenever you can, if possible. We also recommend using a checklist. It's really important that you do it. It's going to keep you on track of things. As the FAFSA changes, NAFSA will update theirs. It's just helpful to guide you through that process. And it's going to help prevent incorrect information completion. As Ryan kind of noted, it's really easy to add an extra zero to something. I've seen students put $80,000 in personal income instead of $8,000 from their year-long job. What I like to say is, when in doubt, don't fill it out. This goes back to a lot of what our panelists had said earlier. Talk to people about something. If you're unsure of what to put into the FAFSA, verify the information and then put it in. It's much easier to do it that way than to have to go back and go through the special circumstances or to make a correction, especially because oftentimes the students don't realize those errors until it's close to the start of the semester. And if you're eligible for aid, we want to make sure that we do everything we can to ensure that you get the aid you're eligible for prior to the start of the semester. So I like to say too, some of the common mistakes that we see are incorrect address, incorrect parental marital status. A lot of the things, like it's just a matter of checking the wrong button, or again, not understanding how this information is relevant to the student. And then I'll say that more is better. Use the federal school code for all colleges you applied to or may consider attending. It can take some time for an institution to get that FAFSA information and to be loaded so that we can have your aid packaged and ready to go. So it is okay to put the max schools on that FAFSA. If you're not sure, from my admissions counselor background, we would always advise students to apply to a minimum of 3 schools. The dream school, like that's where I want to go. I like to say that middle school where you would go there and you would be happy, and then a school close to home just in case something happens. I don't see students, if you apply early, if you use a checklist, if you have as many schools as you can on that FAFSA, those students have a tendency to be set up right. But those are just some of our general tips. Alma and Brian or Donna, do you have anything you'd like to add? Donna, you're on mute.
I would
It
learn that.
wouldn't be a webinar without it. It's okay.
Okay, so in addition to apply early, I would tell the students to attend financial aid workshops or reach out to the colleges for individual help. And then once you file, make sure you follow up. Follow up with the school. See if there's any additional information. Don't wait till last minute only to find out that you were selected for verification. So reach out to the financial aid office, and it's not necessarily a once and done. I would say file the FAFSA and then follow up. Follow up, check, make sure you're in a good place, and that would be my advice.
I want to give time for Q&A, and I'm realizing it's 1:58. I know the FAFSA subject is super interesting. Brian, Alma, do you have anything else you'd like to add on this one, or we can move it over to Q&A? I want to make sure that everybody gets their questions answered.
Yeah, we'll go to Q&A. It's fine.
Yeah.
All right. Does I don't think we don't have any more questions in the question and answer portion. So does any of the attendees, if you have something, type it in there. Since there's not anything in there, Brian and Alma, feel free to go ahead and add if there's something you'd like to about your tips for the FAFSA.
Yeah, I would just again encourage, there are priority deadlines that certain institutions have. So being aware of what those are, having a calendar, staying organized, treating getting financial aid like an Amazon order, like pay attention if there's an error, if there's something that's going on, and just continue to monitor your email, and as much as possible do your prep work, and trust and believe that there are multiple alternative pathways to get to college and get through college. There's not just a sort of one magic way to do that. And so stay persistent, stay encouraged. Feel free to reach out to me or others, I'm sure, if we can help along the way.
Alma?
Pretty much along the same line as Brian has said, do your FAFSA, but like Donna mentioned before, follow up. It's not just because you completed, you're done. If you know the schools that you're gonna be or that you wish to attend to, I highly, highly recommend follow up with them. Make sure that they receive your FAFSA application. Make sure that there's no other documents that you need. The sooner, the better. And I always advise my students, when you complete the FAFSA, you will get an email notification like in 3 to 5 business days. And FAFSA will tell you that your student aid report is ready, which we call SAR. I go to the last page. In the last page of that student aid report, it will tell you if you were selected for verification, if something is just not matching, and follow up with a financial aid counselor. That's the best way to do it. And please don't wait till the last minute.
Thank you all so much. I greatly appreciate you coming to talk with our representatives from various schools about the FAFSA. I know it can be really challenging and not necessarily the most exciting subject matter, but it's something that's really important to our students. Now, something that is a little funner, our rural student organization. So November 16th at 5 p.m., we're hopefully going to have 4 to 7 college campuses who lead student organizations for rural students. We'll send more information about that registration. I think Megan Taylor will be sharing that information out with everyone. And then I also just want to thank you again for joining us. Thank you so much to our panelists again for today. We want you to stay in touch, so you are welcome to join the NACAC Rural SIG and Small Town Special Interest Group. If you are not already a member, it is free. New members can join, and returning members can update their contact information. I have the link to our website here. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. And if you are a school that might have fall break coming up soon, feel free to enjoy it if you're one that gets a little bit of a break in mid-October. And that will wrap up our panel and presentation. Thank you, everyone.